The galaxy had always whispered about the raiders. They were not explorers, not traders, not wanderers of the stars. They were takers. Wherever they landed, only fear remained. Worlds were stripped bare, cities burned, and families left broken. Their reputation carried further than their ships could fly. Entire colonies surrendered at the first sight of their black banners, believing resistance was pointless. To the raiders, the universe was a field waiting to be harvested, and they saw themselves as the rightful owners of whatever they could seize. It was on one such day that their ships descended upon a wild world, one most travelers avoided. This planet was not famous for riches or trade, nor was it a hub of culture. Instead, it was home to towering forests, vast plains, and creatures that even veteran hunters dared not face. Among them were the predators, the kind that lived in stories whispered by alien children who had never even set foot on the planet. These beasts were said to be untamable, too clever and too deadly to ever be enslaved. But the raiders, drunk with arrogance, laughed at such tales. When the scouts first spotted the predator cubs huddled near the edges of a hunting ground, the raiders smirked. "These are the galaxy's feared monsters?" they mocked among themselves. To them, the cubs looked small, almost harmless. Their teeth were not fully grown, their claws not yet sharp enough to tear armor. In the eyes of the raiders, these creatures were nothing more than oversized pets that had lost their way. The cubs, however, did not run. They stayed together, their shoulders brushing as they formed a small, trembling circle. Their growls were low and uncertain, but there was something defiant in the way they stood. The eldest of the group, though not yet fully grown, stepped slightly forward, its head lowered but eyes locked on the invaders. The raiders laughed even louder at this pitiful attempt at bravery. To them, the cub's stand was amusing, nothing more than a delay before the inevitable. But what they didn't realize was that this small moment carried the weight of generations. Predator packs never abandoned their own, not even the youngest. To flee would have been easy, but it was not in their nature. To stay, even when hopeless, was the only way they knew. The raiders had no patience for such courage. Their boots thudded against the ground as they marched closer, weapons glinting under the strange sun of that wild world. The sound alone sent birds fleeing from the trees. Above, with each step, the circle of cubs seemed smaller, the shadow of the raiders stretching longer. The leader of the raider band raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Watch," he sneered to the others, "how quickly pride breaks." He believed. That fear was the strongest weapon of all, stronger than any blade or gun. He expected the cubs to scatter, to abandon each other at the first sign of real danger. But the cubs did not move. Their paws dug into the dirt, their tails flicked with tension, and their golden eyes never left the approaching figures. Their chests rose and fell rapidly, not with panic, but with determination. For all their youth, they had already learned the first law of their kind, to stand together no matter the cost. The raiders surrounded them, weapons raised, their laughter echoing through the trees. They enjoyed moments like this, the power of holding life in their hands, the thrill of watching hope flicker out. Some even placed bets on which cub would run first, their eyes glittering with cruelty. But to their frustration, none ran. The cubs pressed closer, their sides touching now, a small wall of fur and teeth against the storm. They snarled louder, sharper, the sound growing more unified. For a moment, the raiders' amusement faltered. The sight of such young creatures standing so boldly was unexpected. It unsettled them in a way they couldn't quite explain. Still, arrogance pushed aside any hesitation. The leader barked an order, and the first weapon was raised higher, aimed at the defiant little circle. The cubs tensed, ready to fight even if it meant losing. Their claws flexed against the soil, their muscles coiled like springs. It was not the stance of victims, but of warriors too young to know surrender. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind paused in the branches above. Time slowed, and in that silence, the weight of what was about to happen grew heavier. The raiders thought it was just another conquest, another easy victory, but the cubs knew this was more than survival. This was about proving that even the smallest heart can resist. Even the youngest voice can roar. The leader lowered his arm to give the final command. At that moment, something stirred in the distance. A faint sound, almost drowned out by the raiders' boots, reached the clearing. It was steady, measured, unlike the wild chaos of the forest. A rhythm, a beat, the sound of steps. The cubs heard it first. Their ears twitched, their eyes flicked toward the horizon. Something shifted in their posture. Not fear, not desperation, but recognition. The raiders frowned, confused by this sudden change. The sound grew louder, clearer. Heavy steps against the earth, carrying a weight the raiders had never accounted. For the leader snapped his head toward the noise, irritation flashing across his face. "Another beast?" one of the raiders muttered. But it was not a beast. Through the trees, shapes began to emerge. Tall, upright, moving with purpose. Boots striking the ground in unison. Human boots. The raiders froze. For all their conquests, for all their arrogance, they had not expected this. The predator cubs, once trembling and small, now stood taller, their backs straightening as the humans came closer. It was as if courage itself had arrived, wrapped in the sound of marching. Steps. The leader's sneer faded into something colder. For the first time since landing on the planet, doubt crept into his chest. He had mocked the cubs for their defiance, but now, with humans walking toward the clearing, something became painfully clear. These creatures were not standing alone. The cubs' eyes gleamed, no longer desperate but filled with trust. They had been waiting, not for mercy, but for allies. And those allies had arrived in human boots. The forest that had fallen silent now seemed alive with energy, as though it, too, understood the shift. The hunters had become the hunted. The raiders had expected weakness, but instead they had found unity, and unity was far more dangerous than any weapon they carried. As the humans stepped fully into the light, the story of that day began. A story that would travel across the stars, retold in whispers and warnings. The day the raiders thought predator cubs were nothing to fear, until human boots hit the ground. The predator cubs were small, but their world was not kind. From the moment they opened their eyes, life had been a test. Every day brought a new challenge, and every challenge was a lesson in survival. Their mothers had taught them to stay close, to listen to the rustle of leaves, to smell danger before it arrived. But now, with their pack scattered and the older hunters gone, the cubs were left to face their trial alone. The raiders thought them weak. To outsiders, they were nothing more than oversized animals without the strength to resist. Yet, in their hearts, the cubs carried something far greater than sharp teeth or claws. They carried a will, the will to live, to protect each other, to prove that they were not prey. That will was what kept them standing, even when fear pressed against their young bones. The struggle began in silence. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. For days, the cubs had followed fading scents, searching for scraps left behind by their elders. The forest, however, did not show mercy. Prey animals sensed their inexperience and stayed hidden. The cubs learned quickly that the world would not bend for them. If they wanted to survive, they would have to adapt. One cub, the boldest among them, tried first. It crouched low in the tall grass, copying the movements it had seen from the older hunters. Every muscle trembled with effort, but its paws were clumsy, its timing uneven. The prey escaped in a flash, leaving the cub panting in frustration. The others watched, their ears twitching, their own hope dimming. But none mocked or abandoned the effort. Instead, They pressed closer together, sharing warmth, sharing the weight of failure. The second attempt came when they stumbled upon a shallow stream. The water was alive with small, darting fish. The cubs plunged in, claws slicing through the surface, but the fish were quicker, cleverer. Again and again, the cubs snapped at shadows, their bellies filling only with cold water. When they finally dragged themselves out, dripping and tired, their hunger had only sharpened. Still, no one gave up. The struggle was not only against nature, it was against themselves. Fear whispered to them at night when the trees groaned and the shadows stretched long. Without their mothers' voices, without the comfort of a strong pack around them, doubt gnawed harder than hunger. Yet even in those darkest hours, none of the cubs walked away. They huddled close, their breathing in rhythm, their bodies forming a single shape in the night. What outsiders could not understand was this. The cubs were learning. Every failure carved a lesson into their young minds. Every mistake shaped their instincts sharper. The first time they stalked prey, they moved too fast. The second time, they held their ground longer. By the third, their paws were quieter, their eyes steadier. Step by step, struggle by struggle, they were becoming hunters. But the forest tested more than their skill. It tested their bond. When one cub injured its paw on a jagged stone, the others did not leave it behind. They slowed, their pace circling around the limping one, shielding it from predators. When another grew weak from thirst, the strongest dragged it toward water, refusing to let exhaustion claim it. In their small bodies lived a unity that no weapon could break, and the raiders were watching. From the cover of trees and rocks, the raiders observed these tiny struggles with cruel amusement. To them, the cubs' efforts were a performance, entertainment before the inevitable capture. They laughed at the clumsy hunts, at the awkward falls, at the way the cubs licked each other's wounds. Pathetic, one raider sneered. They can't even feed themselves. Another added, when we take them, they'll kneel fast enough. But beneath their mockery, something else stirred. A flicker of unease. For every time the cubs failed, they tried again. For every stumble, they rose. There was no breaking point, no moment where one abandoned the rest. To raiders who lived by betrayal and power, such loyalty was alien. And in some corner of their hardened hearts, they began to sense that these cubs were not as weak as they seemed. The cubs' struggle reached a turning point when a storm struck the forest. Winds howled through the trees, tearing branches loose. Rain poured like sheets of glass, flooding the ground. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the earth itself. The cubs, already weary, had to find shelter fast. Their paws slipped on wet leaves. Their fur clung heavy with water. Their eyes stung from the storm. Together, they pushed on. The smallest cried out, frightened by the booming thunder, but the eldest pressed its body against it, shielding it from the rain. Finally, they stumbled upon a hollow beneath a fallen tree. It was cramped, muddy, and cold, but it was shelter. Huddled inside, pressed tight, the cubs waited as the storm raged. They shivered, their stomachs empty, but they endured. They endured because they had no choice. When the storm passed, the world was new. The air smelled fresh, the forest glistened, and for the first time in days, prey ventured out again. Weak as they were, the cubs followed the scent. Their eyes sharp, their steps quiet. This time, when they struck, they moved as one. The prey bolted, but two cubs cut off its path while the others closed in. Claws flashed, teeth sank, and at last, the hunt was theirs. It was a small victory, but to them it was everything. They fed together, their hunger eased, their spirits renewed. The taste of survival filled their mouths, not just the meat of the kill, but the knowledge that they could endure. They could grow. They could fight. The raiders watched in silence now. Their laughter had faded, replaced with a tight unease. These cubs had been meant to break quickly, to scatter like frightened prey. But instead, they had proven something unexpected. The will to struggle was stronger than fear, and it was in that will the humans would soon find allies. The cubs did not yet know that beyond the trees, footsteps had begun to march. They did not know that their small victories, their stubborn will, were being witnessed by others who understood the language of struggle. For humans, too, were shaped by hardship. They, too, had learned that survival came not from strength alone, but from unity, from refusing to let go when everything seemed lost. The cubs' struggle was far from over. The raiders still surrounded them, weapons ready, waiting for the moment to strike. But what the raiders did not see, what they could not see, was that every failed hunt, every storm endured, every wound licked clean, had prepared the cubs for this moment. The cubs were no longer just frightened young beasts. They were a promise of what was to come. A promise that when the humans finally stepped forward, the bond between them would shake even the cruelest invaders. And so, in the heart of the forest, with hunger still gnawing and danger still near, the cubs stood taller. They were not yet strong enough to win, but they were strong enough to endure. And sometimes, endurance is the sharpest weapon of all. The forest was still recovering from the storm. Broken branches littered the ground, leaves stuck wet and heavy to the soil, and the smell of rain lingered in the air. The predator cubs had survived another night, but the struggle still pressed. On their bones, their bellies rumbled, their fur clung damp, and their paws ached from endless wandering. They did not know it yet, but their world was about to change. Far beyond the trees, a sound unlike any they had ever heard drifted into the forest. It was not the growl of beasts, not the rustle of prey, not the rumble of thunder. It was steady, rhythmic footsteps, heavy boots striking the earth. Each step seemed to carry purpose, each strike leaving an impression deeper than just on the soil. The cubs froze. Their ears twitched, their eyes wide, their instincts screamed danger. For creatures who had only known hunters and raiders, footsteps meant trouble. They crouched low, pressing against the ground, noses twitching as they tried to catch a scent. What they found was unfamiliar: smoke, iron, sweat, and something else. Something strong, but not cruel. The humans had arrived. The raiders noticed before the cubs did. From their hidden positions, they saw the faint figures moving between trees. Their laughter from earlier had already faded, but now a tight unease gripped them. "Humans," one spat, his voice sharp with both disdain and fear. "They always meddle." Another hissed, "This is not their world. Why do they walk here?" But no matter how they grumbled, their eyes betrayed what their mouths tried to deny. They knew what humans meant. Humans had a way of turning even the strongest plans upside down. For the cubs, the sight was almost unreal. From behind a thick trunk, they peered at the strange figures moving closer. The humans were tall, their forms wrapped in weathered clothes and armor scarred with time. Their boots sank into the soft ground, yet they did not falter. Their eyes scanned the forest not with greed, not with cruelty, but with sharp awareness, as though every sound and shadow carried meaning. The cubs felt torn. Instinct told them to flee, to scatter before these towering beings could notice them. But another feeling held them still, a quiet pull, a sense that these strangers were not like the raiders. Their steps were firm, but not violent. Their hands carried tools and weapons, but not raised in threat. The air around them felt heavy, but not hostile. The youngest cub whimpered, a soft sound that barely broke the silence. One human turned, his gaze shifting toward the trees. For a heartbeat, the cub's world froze. Would these creatures chase them, capture them, harm them? But the human only crouched, resting one hand lightly on the ground as though listening to the earth itself. His eyes softened, scanning the shadows not for prey but for presence. Then, slowly, he rose and turned back to his group, leaving the cubs untouched, unnoticed, or perhaps noticed, but not hunted. That single act planted a seed. The cubs followed from a distance, their small paws silent against the wet earth. Curiosity outweighed fear. The humans moved with discipline, their steps measured, their formation tight. They spoke to each other in low tones, their voices calm even in the untamed wild. Every movement seemed deliberate, every glance full of awareness. For creatures so young, so desperate to survive, watching the humans felt like watching strength itself. They saw beings who did not stumble when the ground grew uneven, who did not flinch at the sound of breaking branches, who did not scatter when the wind howled through the trees. Meanwhile, the raiders seethed. From their vantage, the sight of humans entering their hunting ground was an insult. "They ruin everything," one growled. "First the cubs, now this." Another muttered, "Do not underestimate them. Humans are different." They spoke the word as though it were a curse, a mixture of anger and caution. The cubs, unaware of these whispered grudges, continued to watch. When night fell, the humans made camp. A small fire flickered in the darkness, sending warmth into the cold air. The cubs, hidden among rocks and brush, watched with wide eyes as sparks floated upward, glowing like stars. Fire was a mystery to them, a force both terrifying and mesmerizing. Yet the humans controlled it, fed it, kept it alive without letting it destroy. The smell of cooked food drifted through the air. The cubs' stomachs twisted painfully. Their bodies ached to step forward, to inch closer, but instinct still held them back. Hunger pulled, fear pushed. They remained in the shadows, eyes glowing faintly, watching every bite the humans took. The humans, too, seemed aware of being watched. One of them lifted his head suddenly, his gaze piercing into the dark where the cubs hid. The others followed, their hands brushing weapons but not drawing them. Silence stretched, thick and uncertain. Then, one human broke off a small piece of food and tossed it lightly toward the edge of the shadows. It landed with a soft thud, just within reach. The cubs tensed. Was it a trick? Was this how hunters lured the unwary? But the scent was too rich, too tempting. Slowly, one cub crept forward, its body low, its muscles tight. With trembling jaws, it snatched the offering and darted back into hiding. The humans did not move, did not chase. They simply returned to their fire, their voices low, their presence steady. That moment shattered something inside the cubs, not fear, but the belief that all outsiders brought harm. The next night, the same thing happened. Another piece tossed, another hesitant step. Another act of restraint from the humans. The cubs began to see a pattern, and patterns meant safety. Little by little, they edged closer. Their eyes still wary, their paws still ready to flee, but their hunger was no longer their only guide. Something else was growing, a fragile trust. The raiders could not believe it. From the shadows, they fumed as they watched the scene unfold. To them, strength was domination, survival was conquest. The sight of cubs inching toward humans instead of bowing to raiders was an insult to their very way of life. "They choose them," one snarled, barely containing his rage. But the cubs did not hear. All they knew was that the forest no longer felt quite so empty. For the first time since their struggle began, they were not alone. The arrival of humans did not solve their hunger. It did not erase their fear, but it gave them something they had been missing: hope. Hope that survival did not have to mean endless struggle. Hope that the bond forming quietly in the shadows might grow into something stronger. The cubs could not name it, could not fully understand it, but deep within their young hearts, they felt it. The humans were not just passing travelers. Their steps carried purpose. Their fire carried warmth. Their hands carried strength that did not crush, but protected. The forest had changed the night the storm came. But now, with the sound of boots on soil and firelight glowing through the dark, it was changing again. The cubs did not yet know that these humans would soon walk beside them, fight beside them, and defy the raiders in ways no one had expected. But on that first night, as the fire burned low and the cubs crept closer, the world held its breath. A bond was being born, not through force, not through fear, but through patience. A bond that would shape the battles to come. And all of it began with footsteps in the mud and the quiet arrival of humans. The night was heavy with silence before the storm of conflict. The forest, usually filled with calls of night birds and the whisper of wind through the trees, now felt tense, as if even nature itself was holding its breath. The cubs sat close. Together, their eyes bright in the dim light, their ears twitching at every sound. The humans were not far, their fire reduced to embers, their silhouettes sharp against the faint glow. But beyond the trees, hidden in the shadows, the raiders were moving. Their steps were quick, their voices hushed, but the greed in their eyes burned like fire. They had followed the cubs long enough. Now, with humans so close, they had decided the time had come. They would take the cubs by force, show strength, and break whatever strange connection had begun to form between predator and human. The cubs sensed it before the humans did. Their fur rose, their bodies tense, their young hearts racing. A growl rumbled from the largest cub's throat, low and uncertain, but it was enough to draw the attention of the humans. They lifted their heads at once, eyes narrowing, scanning the dark edges of the forest. The humans did not panic. They never did. Their movements were steady, measured. One rose slowly, gripping a weapon not with fear but with focus. Another adjusted their stance, eyes fixed on the dark where shapes began to stir. The raiders stepped forward, their forms, tall and threatening, their presence filling the air with danger. The moment had arrived. The cubs pressed together, torn between fleeing and standing their ground. They had seen the humans' patience, their calm, their strange restraint. But they had also seen the cruelty of the raiders. The cubs knew, deep in their bones, that if they ran now, they would never stop running. If they stayed, if they stood. Beside the humans, perhaps something different could happen. Then the humans made their choice clear. Instead of pushing the cubs away, instead of treating them as burdens, they stepped forward, shoulders squared, boots firm in the soil. They faced the raiders head-on. In that single act, the cubs understood. This was not just about survival anymore. It was about standing together. The first clash came quick. A raider lunged, his movements sharp and violent, but the human blocked. Him with precise strength, the sound of impact echoing in the night. Another raider circled, snarling threats, but before he could strike, one of the cubs leapt forward, claws flashing, forcing the attacker back. The raider's eyes widened in disbelief. Predator cubs, still young and untrained, had chosen to fight. Not against the humans, but beside them. That moment changed everything. The battle grew fierce. The raiders attacked in waves, confident in their numbers and strength. But the humans did not falter. They moved with discipline, each step careful, each strike deliberate. They did not fight like raiders who sought to dominate. They fought like protectors, every action designed not just to win, but to shield the cubs pressed close behind them. And the cubs, emboldened by that protection, found courage they did not know they had. Their growls grew louder, their strikes more confident. They darted between the humans' legs, snapping at raiders' heels, forcing their enemies to divide their attention. Though small, their presence disrupted the raiders' rhythm, giving the humans vital moments to strike. The forest became a storm of movement and sound, boots pounding the soil, claws tearing through air, weapons clashing, voices raised in defiance. Sparks flew from steel, dirt rose with every step, and in the middle of it all, humans and cubs fought as one. For the raiders, it was unthinkable. They had never feared predator cubs. To them, cubs were prey to be taken, trophies to be claimed, proof of dominance. But now those same cubs were fighting with a fury born not of instinct alone, but of trust. And beside them stood humans, whose boots struck the ground with unshakable force, whose eyes carried determination stronger than any weapon. Again and again the raiders pressed, but each time they were forced back. A human would parry a strike. A cub would dart in to distract. Another human would drive the enemy away with sheer will. The bond between them was not spoken, not planned, yet it grew with every passing moment. It was unity born in fire, tested by danger, strengthened by the choice to stand together. The raiders' confidence began to crack. They had expected fear, chaos, easy victory. Instead, they found themselves facing a wall of resolve that would not break. Their attacks grew desperate, their voices louder, their strikes wilder. And in their desperation, they revealed their weakness. They did not understand unity. The humans knew it. They pressed forward, not with reckless force, but with steady strength. Step by step, they turned the tide. The cubs mirrored them, their movements sharper, their growls bolder. The smallest cub, who had once trembled at every shadow, now bared its teeth at a raider twice its size, refusing to back down. The forest echoed with the clash, but beneath it, another sound rose, a rhythm, a heartbeat shared between species, so different yet so connected. Humans and cubs moved as though tied by an invisible thread, each relying on the other, each giving strength the other lacked. And then came the breaking point. A raider, larger than the rest, charged forward with a roar, determined to end the battle in one strike. His blade swung high, his fury burning bright. But before it could land, a human stepped into his path, blocking the strike with unyielding force. At the same time, two cubs lunged at the raider's legs, dragging him down with surprising strength. The human twisted, using the raider's own momentum against him, sending him crashing to the ground. The sight broke the raider's spirit. They stumbled back, their confidence shattered. Where they had expected dominance, they found defeat. Where they had expected prey, they found warriors. And where they had expected division, they found unity stronger than any force they could summon. One by one, the raiders retreated into the shadows, their anger giving way to fear. The forest grew quiet again, the echoes of battle fading into the night. The humans stood tall, their breaths heavy but steady, their weapons lowered at last. The cubs pressed close, their bodies trembling with both exhaustion and pride. It was over. But in truth, it was only the beginning. For the cubs, this night would be remembered not as the night they almost lost everything, but as the night they discovered something greater. They had not just survived. They had fought. They had chosen to trust, and in return, they had been trusted. For the humans, too, it was a turning point. They had not come to dominate, to take, to destroy. They had come to stand beside, to protect, to show that even in the harshest battles, unity could be stronger than fear, and for the raiders, though their bodies retreated, their minds carried the scar. Never again would they look at predator cubs the same way. Never again would they think of humans as outsiders to ignore. They had seen what boots on the ground could do, what trust between species could create. As the fire crackled again, as the humans and cubs rested side by side, the forest seemed to exhale. The storm of battle had passed, leaving behind not just survivors, but allies. The cubs curled near the humans' boots, their eyes closing, their bodies at last allowed to rest. The humans, too, allowed themselves a moment of stillness. their gazes softening as they looked at the young creatures who had chosen them. Unity had been forged in the fire of battle, and it was a unity no raider could ever break. The battle was over, but its echoes stayed long after the forest had gone quiet. The soil still carried the marks of heavy boots and claw strikes. The broken branches, the trampled leaves, and the faint smell of smoke were reminders of what had happened that night. Yet in the silence that followed, there was no fear, only something new, something that felt like the beginning of a story greater than any of them could have imagined. The humans sat near their fire again, their shoulders tired but strong, their faces lit by the soft glow. The cubs lay close to them, some resting, some still restless, their bright eyes following every flicker of the flames. Between them, the air carried no division, no mistrust. Instead, it held a bond that had been tested and proven in the most dangerous way. The cubs no longer saw the humans as strangers. They no longer thought of them as outsiders who didn't belong in their world. The humans had stood between them and death, not once, but many times during the fight. They had blocked blows meant for the cubs. They had struck with precision to give the cubs a chance to strike back, and they had fought not for themselves alone, but for the young predators who had chosen to stay. And the humans, in turn, looked at the cubs with something more than curiosity. They saw strength in their small frames, courage in their growls, and trust in their eyes. These cubs, once seen as nothing more than wild creatures, had shown loyalty when it mattered most. They had not run. They had not hidden. They had stood beside boots that struck the ground with purpose and had proven they were worthy of being called allies. That night marked the start of something greater than survival. It marked the start of a legacy. In the days that followed, whispers spread among the raiders. They had returned home not as conquerors, but as broken men who had tasted fear where they had expected victory. They spoke of predator cubs who fought with a will they had never seen before. They spoke of humans whose boots seemed to shake the ground, whose calm strength turned the tide of battle. At first, some refused to believe the stories, dismissing them as excuses for failure. But the marks on the raiders' bodies, the emptiness in their voices, and the fire in their fearful eyes told the truth. Never again would raiders look at predator cubs as easy prey. Never again would they look at humans as irrelevant outsiders. But the legacy was not written only in fear. It was written in the bond between the humans and the cubs. Each morning, when the sun rose over the forest, humans and cubs walked together. The sound of boots and paws side by side became a rhythm that carried through the trees. The cubs learned from the humans how to move with patience, how to wait for the right moment, how to fight not with blind rage but with strategy. And the humans learned from the cubs, too, how to move through the wild like shadows, how to sense danger before it arrived, how to trust instincts that came from generations of survival. Their training was not spoken in words, but shown in action. When the humans stepped forward, the cubs followed. When the cubs leapt, the humans adjusted to protect their side. Slowly, without realizing it, they built a language of movement, a way of understanding each other without speech. It was a connection deeper than simple companionship. It was unity. The forest itself seemed to notice. Where once the trees echoed with fear and violence, now there was a harmony in the way boots and paws moved together. Other creatures began to notice, too. Predators who once would have attacked now hesitated, confused by the sight of humans walking with cubs unafraid. Prey animals, once quick to scatter, now watched curiously from a distance, sensing that this was not a hunting party, but something different, something new. But the true weight of the legacy came not from the animals or the forest. It came from the hearts of those who had lived the battle. For the cubs, this bond became their identity. They no longer thought of themselves as just survivors of a raid. They were part of something greater. They carried the strength of humans in their steps, and the memory of protection in their hearts. Each time their paws touched the ground beside the firm sound of boots, they remembered that night when they had not been alone. For the humans, the cubs became more than companions. They were symbols of a promise that even in a world full of division, there could be trust between species. The humans carried this lesson with them in every step, in every fire they lit, in every battle they faced afterward. The cubs had chosen them, and that choice gave meaning to their boots striking the earth. Stories of their unity began to spread beyond the raiders' whispers. Other travelers carried tales of humans walking with predator cubs, of battles where paws and boots struck as one, of victories that came not from numbers but from trust. To some, it sounded like myth. To others, it sounded like hope. And hope, once planted, never dies easily. Years passed, but the memory of that night never faded. The cubs grew older, their paws larger, their growls deeper, their strength undeniable. Yet no matter how strong they became, they never forgot the humans who had once stood between them and danger. They never forgot the sound of boots in the soil, steady and unyielding, giving them courage when fear had almost broken them. The humans, too, carried the memory. Their boots wore down with time, their weapons grew old, but the bond they had, forged in the fire of that battle, never broke. When they looked at the paw prints in the mud beside their tracks, they saw not just animals, but family. And in the end, that was the true legacy. Not victory, not defeat, not fear, not dominance. The true legacy was the simple rhythm of boots and paws moving together through a world that had once tried to tear them apart. It was the legacy of trust born in danger, tested in battle, and carried forward in every step they took. For the raiders, the story was a warning. For others who heard it, the story was inspiration. But for the humans and the cubs, it was simply life. A life they had chosen together. The forest still remembers. The ground still carries the marks. And when the wind moves through the trees on quiet nights, it almost seems to carry the sound of boots and paws moving side by side, forever bound in unity. The raiders had once thought predator cubs were nothing to fear. They had once thought humans were nothing to respect. But on that night, when boots hit the ground and paws struck beside them, a new chapter was written. A chapter that would echo for generations. The legacy of boots and paws was not written in words but in the earth itself, and it would never fade.